On today's episode of Getting to Hired, a success story for you. Todd Bremen, retired RCN officer, speaks to us about his successful transition and how it can help you. Coming right up. Hi, my name is Tony Morrow, and this is Getting to Hired, the show that's helping you, the military member, successfully transition from your military career to your new successful civilian one. On today's episode, we have Todd Bremen, a successful transition example. He is an retired RCN officer, veteran, and our role model for today, ladies and gentlemen, Todd Bremen. Todd, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Tony.
So quick, right off the top, when I originally reached out to you and you were kind enough to reply on LinkedIn, we had a back and forth about an article that you had written on LinkedIn, which we will get to over the course of the show. But I hadn't realized it at the time until we actually connected that we briefly, ever so briefly, served together on the tanker on the East Coast. I was finishing up a training course, Mars 4, and I was kind of attached, posted to the tanker for, I think it was a week, and then head back West Coast. And you were kind enough at that time, especially that early point in my career, at that time you were lieutenant commander, I was an acting subby, and you were kind of my first foray into the education of naval tradition, which was good. You were talking to me about executive curl and all this stuff. This was before the rank kind of changed, and it was just it was a neat kind of touchstone for me that you were of such great help to me at the beginning of my naval career, and now, of course, today we're going to talk about the lessons learned that you're sharing and your success story and how you're helping, and your example can help other veterans successfully transition for them. So I just think it's kind of like it's a full circle. It's fantastic. But why don't you tell us the story of who you are as far as your, what you've done as far as your military career, and kind of how you transitioned into, or how you retired from the military and began your transition.
Sure. Well, I joined the Navy a long, long time ago. In fact, as a sonarman, back in 1984. Shortly thereafter, I transitioned over into the logistics branch, became a supply tech. I did that for about 10 years, serving primarily in HMC ships and as well a stint up in CFB Toronto. When I got back to the East Coast, I ended up on a dare going to university and taking a course, and figured out that, in fact, I could do it despite not having been entirely successful in high school, having been more concerned about my social pursuits. So I ended up taking one course, two courses, three courses between deployments, between postings, and one thing led to another. And all of a sudden I found myself with almost a year of a degree done, and a divisional officer looking at me saying, "Todd, have you ever thought about commissioning?" And I said, well, I had, and I ended up applying for the UTP-NCM program, and I had to apply 3 times, and inevitably was successful, and thankfully the military put me back to school for 3 years, finished a degree, came out as a naval logistics officer. After commissioning, again, primarily worked in a naval setting, but also had the occasion to work up with the Joint Support Group in Kingston and some time at Dwyer Hill with JTF2. At about the 27-year mark of my career, once again, I was staring another posting in the eye, this time back to the nation's capital, and having made myself somewhat of a promise that I would do my very best never to move to Ottawa, I sat down and we had a bit of a family meeting, and we had gone through probably in the last 13 years of my military career, I think 12 different postings, a lot of them on the East Coast, but all of them were operational. And so we made a decision as a family that would be the endpoint to my Reg Force career, and we'd put the boys first. So I get out of the regular force and ended up transferring into the reserves over in Shearwater at the Regional Cadet Support Unit. And I stayed there for about 6 years. It got to the point, though, where employment for annuitants was not working out well. And so I got to a threshold where now with 33 years in, I looked at my wife and she looked at me, and we both agreed that it was time. So having looked back at a great run with fantastic postings, good people, lots of hardship and deployments, I decided I was going to look outside, and so I started looking online, and I ended up finding a role in a recruiter's website. Gave him a call and said, "Hey, Austin, can you tell me a little bit about this?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I can." We talked for about 45 minutes. He asked me if I'd come down and see him, and I did. And I was lucky enough that when it actually got to that final day of my career, it was, if I remember correctly, Friday, May the 12th. I did what every good sailor should do. I took the weekend off, gave myself self-imposed 48s, and went to work at a little manufacturing company on the Monday. He had me placed basically retire Friday, start Monday, and I went to work there as my first civilian role after 33 years in a uniform.
That's fantastic. You had you are a perfect example of one of the things you mentioned about in your article on LinkedIn, the fact that you need to plan early. And so, I mean, not only did you transition from the Reg Corps to the Reserve, but you had that plan, but also the plan that when you were going to finish your days in uniform, that you had something that you were essentially going to walk into, translate into, transition into, and that was great. Fantastic success story, except that I was shocked when you told me that didn't work out, and the way it happened was so surprising. So can you tell us maybe a little bit of what it was like that first day out of uniform, starting a civilian job, and then the surprise that came around the corner and how you ended up dealing with that?
Sure. Well, the first day out of uniform, I would say, was a whole lot surreal. I had served for 33 years. I was very proud of the opportunities and the privileges that were afforded me, and the fantastic people that I worked with and served alongside. And when you've got a great looking naval uniform and you've got a chest full of medals and you walk in public, and people look, because there's a real sense of pride that comes along with being that guy or being that girl. And I went to work on Monday in a pair of khakis and a golf shirt, and I walked into a manufacturing plant that was dirty, and I didn't have a tie on. And so I remember walking down I was about to say flats, but I remember walking down the hallway at this little company, and one of my staff, one of my workers out in the warehouse, yells at me from about 50 feet away, and he says, "Hey, Todd, do you want to grab a coffee?" And it caught me completely off guard, because my first instinct was, why is this guy from the warehouse calling me by my first name? And so and it's not to sound pretentious, I hope, but it's just that immediate cultural eraser that happens. And so it really did take some time to get used to that. But I will tell you that it wasn't too long after that where every once in a while somebody, just out of respect for my I suppose, gray hair and more salt than pepper might call me sir. And it almost felt weird because I very quickly became accustomed to working in a civilian organization. And in fact, I really kind of embraced it and liked it because it allowed for a much more personal connection with the people who were working in my department. So after about 16 months, and growing into a company that I really believed I was contributing well towards, as a naval logistics officer, I was in a supply chain manager role. I was generating real savings, material savings for the company. In fact, greater in my first year, I think I probably saved the company more than the whole of my salary. And so about 16 months later, on a Monday at about 10 to 4, my boss called me and he said, "Hey, Todd, can you come over to the conference room?" And I said, "Yeah." And hung up, and I started to walk across, and I thought, okay, here's that bonus I was looking for. I thought it was coming. I walked into the room. My boss had the look of a man who was about to shoot his dog. The president of the company was sitting at the end of the table, and my boss slid a brown envelope across the table, and he said, "Todd, I've got unfortunate news, but we've gone through a strategic realignment, and unfortunately your position has been eliminated. This is your package. Feel free to take it and review it at home. We expect a response within 5 days. As a courtesy, we'd like to escort you over to your office so that you can clean it out. We would appreciate you not saying anything to any of your staff until we have a chance to make that announcement in the morning." And I looked at him and I said, "Joe, I've been driving down here for just over a year and I love it. So much so that I've traded in my Wrangler because it drives like a monster on the highway. And I traded it in on the Saturday before this happened for a Cherokee Trailhawk because I wanted a better drive. I said, I just bought a brand new vehicle so that I have a better ride down here to go to work." And he said, "I'm sorry." Anyways, he escorted me over to my office. I packed it all up. I did it in 20 minutes. Took 8 minutes to write a turnover set of notes for him. He came in. I spent 2 notes back briefing on what was important and going on inside of the department. He helped me put my boxes in my Jeep, and I was done. Wow. And for the first time in my life, I was truly unemployed. I didn't have a job.
And so I just want to take a second to point out, you did everything right. You set yourself up with a plan. You executed that plan effectively as far as going from your military career into a civilian job. You lined that up, you scouted it ahead of time, you set it up, and you executed on it. You had a job. And then you did all the things you're supposed to do, ticks in the box, due diligence, and then this happens. So now just to kind of wind it back ever so slightly, you mentioned that while you were working for this company in the 16 months that you were there, you were able to get a certification. So could you briefly just say what that is? Of course,
sure.
It's on the screen here, but so what was involved in that and why that's so valuable?
Well, so obviously, as a senior naval logistics officer, I had been afforded the opportunity to do a ton of training. All of the qualifications required to be a finance officer, all of the qualifications to be a supply officer in the military. I was really kind of almost fast tracking towards all of my promotions, and I kind of concentrated more on service need and mission first, which is of course what you do if you wear a uniform. And what I didn't take time to do was work towards certifications or specific qualifications that were translatable on civilian street. Fortunately, though, I had done enough of a professional logistics certification that when I knew that I was going to get out of the forces, like all the way out, I called up the PLOG Institute in Toronto and talked to the president, and I said, Victor, I need to get my PLOG finished. It's important because I'm getting out. And the one thing that I noticed was every poster for every job that I was looking at in a supply chain manager or supply chain director role, and even some coordinators positions, they all asked for a designation, every one of them. And so I happen to have mentioned my desire to go on to finish my PLOG to this little manufacturing company that I had secured the position with. And they were very, very supportive of professional development opportunities. So in fact, they made it a condition of employment. And they said, when you come down within 6 months, we want you to go back and we want you to finish your PLOG. And of course, yes, please. So I went to work, and in May, June, July, August. So about 3 months later, they bought my plane ticket, paid for my conferencing fees, and I flew up to just north of Barrie and finished my PLOG certification. And I couldn't overstate this enough. If one wants to be successful, at least in kind of my wheelhouse of supply chain, logistics, procurement, I think probably in lots of others that involve project management, which is of course just a natural fit for veterans. Each of those things come with a fairly significant time commitment, whether it's 6 months to 2 years to 3 years. And so having had the opportunity to work early towards my PLOG designation, and then just happen to have found the right company to let me go all the way and get it, that was a huge, huge bonus, because if I had not had that designation later on, as we will talk about, you just don't get manager jobs or above unless you've got a designation. And it's that simple, because everybody on the outside does. And all of that training that I had, all of those things that prepared me to deploy with ships and with troops ashore, to bad places and do really amazing work, it doesn't count. It doesn't translate into the civilian marketplace. And so the PLOG for me was just such an important part of the recipe.
Well, it's interesting to hear you describe it that way, because of course in the military we have countless different qualifications that you need to get depending on what your trade is. But there's a ladder, a progression of, increasingly more sophisticated and complicated and involved qualifications that you get. From a logistics perspective, you need to be, qualified and aware and, be able to exercise your skills in finance and supply and supply chain management, like you were talking about, especially with Navy logistics, because you do it all. But I mean, from my own experience as a Mars officer, you have, ship driving qualifications that you need to get, and then command qualifications, and that's a progression that you have to go through as well. So, and it doesn't matter what the trade is, they've all got their own. But what's interesting about this is that the military is its own kind of ecosystem when it comes to that. And when you come out of the military, those skills don't come with you in an accredited way, and that you need to get the equivalent civilian version of that. And depending on what it is, it's an easy kind of sidestep, or you can take a test or so on to just get that tick in the box. But like, for example, you're talking about PLOG or PMP for project management and so on. There's numbers of hours that you have to log and time that you have to spend working towards those, even just the ability to write the exam. And then of course, the qualification. So, you, again, to recap, you had a plan. You went from Reg Force to reserve, from reserve into a job that you had set up for yourself post-release. You were in that job, and then they laid you off, and you were struggling. You were in a position where you needed to kind of like find your footing. You had the P-log in hand, but what was it like for you the evening of the next day after you kind of came home and had a moment to kind of decompress and digest what had just happened?
Well, when as you were framing the question, it almost sent a shiver down my spine, because like I said, here I was, very successful, in a military context, went straight into that, what I thought was a perfect job, right in my wheelhouse. I get walked into a room at 10 to 4 in the afternoon, and I'm unemployed. So walked out, loaded my stuff up with the help of my boss, drove home, went out, sat on the deck, and like a good maritimer, the first thing I did was cracked a cold Keith's, and just started to kind of collect my thoughts. My wife came home and she said, "What's wrong?" I do not have a good poker face. And I told her, and after a big cry, she said, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, I know what I'm going to do." And I really, some people would say that they fold back into the cocoon, and in some respects, that's exactly what I did, except I embraced the thing that I knew best, and that was how to approach a mission. And so what I did was I looked at her and I said, "I'm going to get up in the morning. I'm going to go down to the office that you see behind you, and I'm going to go to work. I'm going to do my next mission." And she said, "What's the next mission?" I said, "Find a job." And so, that night we went to bed, and I don't think either of us got a lot of sleep because, yes, I had a pension, and yes, that's awesome, but it wasn't enough to support my family. And, I was facing unemployment, and, and we're talking about things like, how long before we lose a house and stuff like that. And I just said, okay, well, that's just not going to happen. So let's brush yourself off and let's do what we do best as veterans. Plan and execute, your next mission. And so I got up the next day, came down to the office. I purposefully got into business casual attire. I will admit that my tie in my office, in my house, with my cup of coffee out of my Keurig, I only wore my tie for about 3 weeks before I got kind of tired of that, and I thought I'm going to be more casual in my own workspace. But I got up every day and I went to work in my office, and I started to plan out how I would find employment, because I knew that inherently I had the skill sets to work in any supply chain management role. I knew that, and that was based on years of success as a veteran. But I had to figure out how to translate that out into the marketplace. And so I got on LinkedIn, which, some people may believe in, some people may not. I am a huge believer. I got on LinkedIn and I started to read articles about transition. I started to look at LinkedIn content. And Tony, as much as you paid me a compliment earlier about being that first senior naval officer who, kind of took you alongside and talked to you about naval tradition, you were one of the first people that I found when I started looking. And I think it might have been one of your first walk along the beach in Victoria. And two things kind of struck me. One, it just kills me that you guys can walk outside in fricking any time of year and it's still sunny. But but the other thing was, I thought, here's a guy who's got a positive message. And I wanted to surround myself with people who were really exuding confidence about what we had to offer, because I think the positive message helped propel me in my search. And so I started that search, and it was just up every day. There's a great video out that we talked about once. Vice Admiral, the Navy SEAL.
Yeah, the commemoration speech. He talks about making your bed.
Absolutely. So that's on my LinkedIn profile. And I watch that once a month, every day. Get out of bed, prepare for the day, and that positive message. That's what I did.
It's so thank you very much for that compliment.
You're welcome.
And that's essentially what this is all about. This program, this show, your lessons learned that you're sharing today is all about helping veterans in their transition, whether that's motivation, education, showing the way, and again, sharing lessons learned. It's all about giving everyone out there the tools to be able to be more effective and successful in their military transition and finding the next greatest thing in their civilian life.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned, dialing in on the things that you were talking about. The first step really was that mindset that once you came home, as opposed to what many people, I mean, let's be fair. Let's call a spade. Navy folks and military in general, we're really good at griping. We can complain a good game, but when it came to that, you chose, and you did this active choice. You chose not to sit back and moan and groan about your situation, but rather lean in and engage it, understanding that essentially you were handed a mission at the end of that day at 4:30, whenever it was that you were given that brown envelope. And in that envelope, while it may have seemed like their termination papers and your settlement agreement, it was your mission to find your next gig, your next job,
100%.
your next occupation. And you dug into that with with full grip, and you, like you say, got up every morning, got dressed, went to the office, your office, and began that process. And so I just want to, first of all, recognize, congratulate, and use that as an example of one of the hardest first steps that we all need to take, whether it's post-release or, if you've lost your job and you're trying to find the next one, is being able to kind of, drop it into gear and start accelerating into your next whatever that is. And you did that very successfully. And so great example.
Thanks.
And lesson learned there. Now, as far as the tools or the assets you deployed in this search, you mentioned LinkedIn, for example, and social media in general, but specifically LinkedIn being the professional medium for social media. You can't say enough good things about it. Of course, over at this point in 2019, over 80% of jobs in North America are populated and filled using LinkedIn job postings and search material. Recruiters actively use LinkedIn in this way, just as you described, to be able to fill positions across North America. But you deployed a specific asset when it comes to networking and building the relationships with recruiters and having advocates work on your behalf to find you that next opportunity. Can you perhaps describe that a little bit, explain how you made those contacts and how you ended up leveraging them to find your next position at Develop Nova Scotia?
Sure. So one of the first things that I did was, when I was reading all about transition and all about LinkedIn and what LinkedIn says one should do in order to be successful using that medium to find employment, one of the things that they said was you need to build a network. And some article that I read said the number is 500 relevant network connections. And I thought, whoa, that's a big circle. But what I did was probably half of every day for over a month, I went on to LinkedIn and I found businesses that were in my wheelhouse. So people in the defense industry, government, you name it, anything that had logistics, beer manufacturers, you name it. I mean, let's be honest. Logistics is the hub of the world, and we all know that, but some just won't admit. Anyways, so I started to build that network, and I built the network around companies that had that logistics component to their business. But I also started to build around not just the practitioners, but the people who could lead you to the practitioners. And so on the very good advice of my wife, who's much smarter than I am, she said, Todd, what you need to do is you need to go back to first principles. When you were getting out, you went to a recruiter, and the recruiter found you a job. And she said, you know, the real benefit to that situation was, you know, when you called and talked to Austin, instead of competing against 3 or 4 or 500 other applicants, he narrowed it down to probably 5 or 6 that he pushed off to the hiring company. They saw my file in a much more concentrated collection of resumes and cover letters. And you know, and so they had a chance to get to know me better, quicker. And I think that that's why I got that first job. And so she said, you need to make sure that you're building out your network to include those people. And so in that transition recipe document that I wrote, I talked about Catherine, who is the next recruiter that came into my life. And as I put in my article, Catherine was without question my Jerry Maguire of recruiting. She took the time to get to know me, and as a result, you know, I ended up finding my current position. But the effort that went into LinkedIn to build that network out, to start to have conversations with people, and you know, and things like the LinkedIn discipline of, you know, if you send a request, don't just do a cold call. You know, you put a little bit of a note in there and you say, hi, my name's Todd. I'm a retired veteran with, you know, significant competencies in supply chain logistics and procurement, and I'm actively seeking new opportunities. Saw your profile and thought maybe, you know, we could have something to discuss, and if not, maybe I might just you know, gain from your insights, and put little notes like that in. And when you get the connection back, the courtesy of saying thank you, thanks for connecting, because it's a choice for them.
Yes.
And so the whole LinkedIn piece started to flow out. So that's kind of like the one first lesson that I kind of put into play for me. But there was a second, and the second was a place called Job Junction here in Halifax. Now, I know that the CF Transition Group is working on the new, I think it's called Agelic Transition Services. And I've had some brief interactions with them, and I think that that could be a really good tool for some people. Unfortunately, when I talk to somebody like a recruiter, I want to be face-to-face. I want them to see me, understand me. I want them to feel me. And so that really wasn't my thing. So again, on the advice of my wife, she said, well, there's this place called Job Junction, and you need to go there. And what it is, and there's probably things like this in a lot of cities across Canada. It's provincially and federally funded. It's free to anybody who walks in the door. They have case managers to work with you to help you build a better resume. They offer workshops on how to interview better, on, you know, how to find your way through the hidden job market, build, you know, a better cover letter, you name it. And the truth was, after 33 years in the military of writing more memos and letters and looking at more PERs than you could shake a stick at or ever want to see again, I thought my writing skills were pretty good. And I walked into this Job Junction, and I will tell you, they got so much better, because again, all of my writing skills, all of that we're really focused towards military writing, and it's not the same. So, and I maybe I should be a little bit embarrassed to even admit this, but my first resume that I sent to Austin on that first job, I sent it to him, and it was 13 pages, because who wouldn't want to read all about my career? Well, that's including the cover letter. And ironically, I was also talking to an ex-naval officer who was working at a major shipbuilding company here in Halifax, and he said to me, he goes, "Todd, let's be honest." He said, "The only reason why I, as a director, would ever see a 13-page cover letter and resume is because I was having a bad day and my staff wanted to provide me a little bit of comic relief." So, I mean, Austin just looked at me and said, "Todd, 2 + 1, 2 pages on your resume, 1 on your cover. That's about it. You can get to 3 maybe on your resume, but the underpinning is this. Even if you think you have the very best resume and cover letter, even if you think that you know how to interview exceptionally well because you've done all kinds of boards and you name it, you can get better, because it's not the same environment. It's a civilian environment, and you have to learn new skills in order to dominate that battle space." So I went to Job Junction, and Tony, I did resume and cover letter writing, and I did the hidden job markets, and I did the interviewing skills. Jeepers, I was on a first name basis with almost everybody there, but it really made the difference, because my resume and cover letter, some people say a resume and cover letter is there to do what? To get you a job? That's wrong. A resume and cover letter is there to get you an interview. What you do in the interview gets you the job. And so I immediately found that after I had revamped all of my documentation with the assistance of the people at Job Junction, I started getting hits a lot more frequently. But the third and without question, and I've already talked about this a little bit, but the most important part of the recipe for me in my industry and in my city was the recruiters. And so I had reached out and met or connected with Catherine through LinkedIn, and followed all of her posts, and she posted a position, and it was a 6-month contract at a children's hospital here in Halifax. And I gave her a call and I said, "Hey, that sounds like something I could do." And she goes, "You know what, Todd, you're probably perfect for that. Come on in and let's talk." And I went in, sat down, had a great chat. And she said, "I'm going to pass your file. This could move quickly, so be prepared." And I said, "Well, moving at short notice, that's what I'm good. I mean, it's a military thing." Absolutely. And so the next morning at 8:00, she called me and said I had an interview that afternoon at 2. And on the Monday after the interview, they said, "Oh, we got good news and bad news. The position that we're interviewing, or they interviewed you for, they're not going to offer it to you. What they really want to do is build a position around you and around the special skills that you bring as a veteran." They recognize the leadership skills, the innovation, the ability to work around challenges. I mean, one of the things that a little article that I put into my LinkedIn profile, I think at the very beginning, was all about what I consider to have been the top 10 reasons to hire a veteran. And it was like they were naming them all off. Anyways, so bottom line, the best part of the recipe is this: find your Catherine, find your recruiter who believes in you. Keep looking for that person. And when you find them, when you get that opportunity to sit down and talk, and they hear the confidence that comes through with somebody who has served, in the face of the enemy, it's really easy to make believers, and things start happening then.
So to reiterate what you just said. The value of a veteran. Like, it's not just hype. There is real tangible value in being a veteran. Have confidence in that, leverage that, work that forward. 2, find your Catherine. Find an advocate, a recruiter, or a person that you have a relationship with who will promote you, encourage you, bring you up in an employment environment so that they can position you for success, in that environment. And to go back to a piece with regards to your P-log, the accreditations and the qualifications that you can get, whether you consider them ticks in the box or what have you, to be able to translate the vocabulary and the certifications that you have from your military experience into that civilian experience, so that the civilian on the other side of the table can recognize the value that you have. When you show up there and you say, I have, these military credentials, they have no idea what those may relate to. But if you come in and say, I'm a PMP, I'm a P-log, I have an MBA, I have a BBA, those are accreditations that they can relate to, that they can identify, and they know how that Lego piece fits in their puzzle, and they can use you in that way. So
100%.
Just fantastic. So keeping in mind, again, so the plan that you had, the hiccups that you faced, and the success that you face kind of today, can you think of, at key points, what were and perhaps in other veterans that you've seen or you've spoken with or that you've related to, what are some of the pitfalls that we've kind of addressed them, but, are there any critical flaws that you can see that a veteran may engage in or kind of fall into that would torpedo their success in their transition to civilian life?
Absolutely. So the first one that I would offer you is shotgun resumes and cover letters. The first instinct of somebody who's 40 or 50 years old comes from who's been in the military for 20 or 30 or 35 years, are based on decades old employment strategies. Well, what do you do when you're a kid? Because that's the last time I had really looked for a job before I joined the Navy. What did I do? I went downtown. I had 30 resumes. I went to every fast food place on Yonge Street, and I started handing out the flyers. Yeah. And so the difference is we do that through social media and through Monster and through Indeed and through all of the other engines. And so what do? You get online, and anything that looks like it might be a good fit, you throw out a resume, you throw out a cover letter, and you sit back and you wait for them to come to you. And I would tend to believe that you've got to have a very special document with really, really exceptional credentials that stand out way above any of your civilian counterparts before you're going to get the look. Because when you go through Indeed or through Monster or any of these search engines, like I said earlier, I mean, you're working against hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of files. And unless you understand, as an example, that, most of these engines on behalf of the employer have an ATS system or an automatic tracking system, unless you realize that the word choice that you put into your cover letter and resume exactly matches the keyword searches that they're going to apply to all of the documents for all of the people that are throwing in an application. I say procurement, you say purchasing. Well, if I'm not using your word, their ATS system does not pick up my resume because I didn't have the threshold of word correlation. And so shotgun approaches do not work. You may eventually get lucky, but the shotgun approach is kind of like thinking, if I play my numbers every Friday night, eventually I'm going to win the lottery. Well, it's just
that was the way it worked.
Indeed, it's just not true. So what you have to do is you have to build that relevant network, and then you need to target the right places. You need to make the connections, because many people, and I really don't care what industry you come from, many people would agree that the vast majority of jobs get filled before they ever make it to the internet.
Yes.
And it's through those important connections that real success can be gained. The other pitfall, and I kind of got into a valley on this one at least once or twice. I had applied for some jobs which I thought I'm perfect for. Defense industry, naval environment, supply chain management role. I had a brief discussion because I made a LinkedIn contact with somebody there. We happened to know some of the same people from a ship a long time ago. And I thought, I'm a shoo-in. And so I started to let my presence dwindle a little bit because I was counting on that one perfect job. And that is a pitfall which is easy to fall into. LinkedIn says you should always have 6 different processes on the go at any given time. So whether you've applying, drafting, what have you, never stop the search until you actually land that right perfect role for you. Because what you will do is you will end up sitting in your office at the end of the day, and all of those perfect roles that you thought were going to come through will peter out, and all of a sudden you've got nothing in the marketplace. You have to keep charging forward. You have to maintain your mission focus until you find that great right role. And although we haven't really kind of gotten into this, it's the new article that I'm just drafting. One of the things that I really believe in now, having what I would consider to be a perfect job, right fit. When you're looking for those roles, read between the lines, talk to as many people as you can, do some online research about where you're applying. Right fit isn't something which is exclusive to the person who's doing the interviewing. It should be as important to you or I. And so, and it took me a lot of years, even while I was in the military to now, to understand that right fit is a two-way street. And if you are very thorough in your research and a little bit lucky, and you have an employer who says, you know what, I knew I was going to hire you 10 minutes into the interview. And you look at them after you've got the job and you say, well, you know what, 10 minutes into the interview, I knew that I wanted to stay.
There you go.
That's the real, the big prize.
So making sure that you don't stop hustling, don't take your foot off the gas, because until you've got, money in your pocket, the job in the bag, until you've got that offer on your desk, you signed on the dotted line, it's not a reality. The talking about how the shotgun approach, seeing what sticks, that doesn't work, and how having an advocate working on your behalf, an agent, if you will, targeting your efforts to make you one of 5 instead of one of 500.
Totally.
That cuts through the noise and gets your signal, your profile, your personality in front of the right people so that they can make a decision. And it's funny when you talk about the right fit, I don't think that a lot of us with military experience necessarily give this any credence or thought for a couple of reasons. One, in a military environment, especially in a reg force environment, you don't ask questions about where you're getting posted. I'm getting posted to this ship in this position. Got it. I'm there. And if you don't get along, or there's a problem with some of the people that you're working with, or an environment, or somewhere in the chain of command, there's a person or a culture that for whatever reason doesn't work, because every ship has its own personality, every unit has its own personality, each department has a slightly different kind of personality or atmosphere to it.
Each coast has its own personality.
Each coast, exactly, west to east coast. So if I'm going to be, for example, as a guy who sailed in the 280s right over your shoulder there, like Athabasca or Athabascan versus Algonquin, totally different ships. And as a military member, you just go where you're told and you just integrate yourself. You find a way to make it work, as opposed to now, where you have the option, the choice, the flexibility, and the power to be able to find that best fit, to find a place where you will be happy. I hope and pray that that you were happy in your military career when you had it. Now, on the other side of that door, you have all the power, all the choice to be able to find that next thing and be happy in it and choose to be happy in it. And it takes some self-awareness and kind of emotional intelligence to look inwardly and to see, what is it that I want to do? What is it that I want to be? You may not want to do and continue doing what you were doing professionally in the military. You may want to be something totally different. You might have been a pilot and now you want to, bake bread, or, you might have been an accountant and now you want to whatever.
Pilots don't want to bake bread. If you're a pilot, you want to listen. My dad was a pilot and he just wanted to fly his whole life. Come on.
I want to drive fast.
If you were a MERS officer, you might want to bake bread, but anyways.
But in the sense that you may have done one thing in your professional career and it may look totally different, a polar opposite.
Totally.
In your new civilian life, but you have the choice and you have the option, the flexibility to find that thing and to find happiness as you have found in your next occupation. So, just to recap the quick points, I mean, they can find, first of all, I challenge everybody watching this video. First of all, go on LinkedIn. If you don't already have a profile, if you don't already have this app on your phone, if you don't already go on your computer and visit LinkedIn regularly, set up an account and create a profile. The second thing, you will notice that we were talking about having 500 plus people of consequence in your network. And if you start day one with 0, or maybe you've only got 10, 20, 100, when I started my LinkedIn journey, I had double digits, 10, 20 people in my network because I had not spent any time on LinkedIn prior and then started to apply my energy and effort into it. So start working and building in your network. There is a series on the Getting to Hired channel about LinkedIn basics, 1, 2, and episode number 3, talking about how you do that. There you go. And it'll tell you the step-by-step process of how to build the basics of a profile. And then you can start moving forward from there. Build slowly, over time, build your network into a larger network of 500 plus people, because once you hit 500, all it says is 500 plus. Now, the more people in your network, the better, but that's the beginnings of you building the online network that you need to build. And of course, absolutely, in-person meetings, in-person shaking hands, face-to-face, that nothing as great and wonderful as this medium is. Face-to-face meetings have a special magic of their own. So I strongly encourage everyone to engage in as many networking and face-to-face events as possible. Todd, I want to take a second and take a step back from the interview aspect of this, and I want to talk about the Sisters of the Space Age.
Okay.
So for those of you who don't know, there's a picture over Todd's shoulder, which is of one of the 280s. Is it Athabascan?
Well, that would be the painting done by a fairly famous West Coast artist named Bo Hermanson. That picture is of Athabascan during the first Persian Gulf War, pre-tribal update. And it's of a mission that we did up in the Northern Gulf. USS Princeton had hit some influence mines up there and was disabled. And they couldn't find anybody with the right capabilities or capacity. So they called on the Canadians to sail up through a minefield, bring an ocean-going tug with us, and to get her hooked up and brought down to safety. And this all based on, as rumor would have it, some very inventive sonar ops and some combat types who I'm told took Bassmaster technology through garbage bags full of empty beer cans over the side of the ship. And we did circles around them so that they could find mines. Anyways, so we went up and pulled her out, but that's what that picture is. And in truthfulness, the water wasn't quite as choppy. I think there was a little bit of creative artistry going on there, but nonetheless, it was a deployment I'm pretty proud of.
And that particular, we're talking about the 280s. There was, now granted, full disclosure and asterisks ahead of this story, it's purely rumor. However, the 280s, or the tribal class destroyers, were once referred to as the sexiest warships on the water, and there is a little bit of a story behind that, and you told me that story, so would you mind sharing it with us?
Well, as the rumor has it, one of the 280s, I believe it was in the early 70s, was in New York, and Hugh Hefner was in town to go to one of his Playboy clubs, and he was driving across one of the bridges and looked down, and lo and behold, he saw a 280, and he looked at the bunny funnels, or the funnels, which were in fact designed that way because they thought it would expel the gases and reduce the heat signature of the ship and avoid gases going back during helicopter operations. Anyways, not that Mr. Hefner had any appreciation for this. He saw the two funnels going left and right, and he automatically thought that they looked like his more famous bunny ears. And so my understanding was he had a look at that, went down, they took a couple of snaps. And while I have searched more than once to find out what edition it might have come out in, the rumor is that Hugh Hefner was in fact the one who nicknamed the funnels on the pre-Trump 280 the bunny funnels.
The bunny funnels, the sexiest ship on the water. Absolutely.
Indeed.
So having both sailed in 280s, 280s being just the number designation of the ships, but having both sailed in that class of vessel, beyond the fact that we spent that ever so dear week on the tanker together, but we sailed in similar platforms, and I've sailed in Athabee as well before she was retired. Just another great story and common point of contact. Well, Todd, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Not only and being open and willing to discuss, your story, your journey, and using it as an example for other veterans, as a lesson learned, as an example of success. And I mean, it wasn't smooth and easy sailing for you. You had everything planned, you ticked all the boxes, and then still were thrown, a hiccup. And yet the way you dealt with that is the example of how we all should and can deal with our transition to be able to find success on the other side. So Todd, I want to take a moment. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, listen, it's been a pleasure. And, as you throw the challenge out to anybody who might be watching this, and any veteran who's in transition, go on LinkedIn, create a profile. I would offer this. I have always been very interested in veterans advocacy, even more so now that I am one. I think the mission that people like you have in really taking this challenge on is an important one. And if any one of your followers decides that they want to take you up on that challenge, create that profile, my name is right there. Throw me a connection. And if there's ever anything that I can do, whether it's just providing you access to an article that I may have wrote while I was commiserating about how to find a job, perfect. But no, I'm pretty dedicated to helping out in any way I can, and certainly applaud you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you, Todd. And again, thank you again for sharing your story and putting that offer out there to be able to connect with anyone who's looking to take that first step and build their network. So thank you very much, Todd, for joining us today on Getting to Hired. For everyone, Feel free. I will have links to Todd's LinkedIn profile down below, as well as the article that we made reference to several times talking about the recipe for transition success. Thank you all for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye for now.